the Okay, the Activate implementation methodology for extended edition. There's a dedicated roadmap just for extended edition. So unlike in the situation with the best practices content, so the best practices business processes and things, we just look at the on-premise best practices because there is not a dedicated package just for extended edition, being that extended edition is functionally the same as on-premise in terms of the scope and functionality. So in that particular case, we can just reference the on-premise package. It's actually the same with the help portal as well. If you go look at any help portal type content, you'll be just looking at the on-premise help portal information because again, that's addressing functional type things related to how different applications function, how you do particular things like the process to assign business roles, business permissions to end users is completely different than it is in Cloud Essentials Edition, but it is the same between extended and any premise. So therefore, it's covered in the on-premise or any premise version in the help portal. This is the one case where we have a separate area because with the implementation methodology, each solution or deployment option does really have its own unique implementation methodology. And there are certain differences just because inherently this is a private cloud solution. So the first thing that we talk about that's really important are the golden rules for the implementation of cloud solutions. So the idea here is to have what's called a cloud mindset or to foster a cloud mindset. And the goal would be to have this cloud mindset for all deployment options, whether it's any premise or cloud extended edition. So the cloud mindset just revolves really primarily around the concept of life cycle management and keeping the system stable when release upgrades are regularly implemented, because it's really only going to benefit the customers and help them get the most return on their investment out of the solution the more frequently they install the upgrades, because then they're getting the new enhancements and new features. I should mention that even though there are 2 upgrades per year that happen, only 1 upgrade is covered with the enhanced managed, with the HANA Enterprise Cloud managed services. So if you wanted to do both of those upgrades per year, you would do one of the upgrades with paying for it essentially out of your enhanced managed services credits. So it's obviously strongly recommended that you do every upgrade, but because an upgrade, especially depending on the complexity of your landscape, can be very time intensive in the situation of extended edition, the support team only has it essentially in their scope to work with you one-to-one to do and plan and execute 1 upgrade, unless you contract with additional managed services or enhanced managed services. So with the cloud mindset, the golden rules are not enforced for S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition because, of course, you can do customizing transactions in the back end of the system, but they are strongly recommended just to make it easier to manage the system. So due to the single tenant architecture, or the fact that you're the only tenant or customer on the sharing the bandwidth with yourself, essentially, of one entire server, this is why you have the additional ability to do more customization and more flexibility. The golden rules for implementing S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition include fostering a cloud mindset by sticking to the fit to standard and agile deployment methodology detailed in the Activate methodology roadmap. You'll be using Solution Manager, of course, to actually manage the whole implementation and deployment of the solution itself, but following the roadmap itself. And in this particular case, for this roadmap, the tasks that are listed don't necessarily need to be done in order. So it just kind of depends, because with extended, you can also have a much more variance between different implementations depending on the customer needs. Number 2, as much as possible, use pre-configured solutions. when you can. So use the best practices, use the SAP model companies, use qualified partner package solutions, rather than building your own super unique customizations that may cause the system to be unstable or cause the system to have conflicts in future release upgrades that you install. Ensuring the use of modern extension technologies means leveraging the Fiori app extensibility applications to build the in-app extensions within the system. So using the Fiori Launchpad, basically using the pre-built applications for what they're designed to do. For extensions outside the capabilities of those Fiori extensibility apps, build side-by-side extensions via Cloud Platform instead of using the classic extensibility tools like Eclipse, Web IDE, and the transaction SE80, which is access to the ABAP workbench. There's also an S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition Extensibility Guide that I'll give you the link for later on. I have to grab that link specifically, but it's in an SAP note in the Support Launchpad, and it really clearly details out exactly what you can and can't do and has really great examples. And the main thing to just remember is that there's no source code modification. That's the big difference between Cloud Extended and any premise. For integrations, modern integration technologies refers to using best practices integration scenarios when they are available. With Cloud Essentials, there's a lot more standardization, therefore there's a lot more of an ability for SAP to develop pre-delivered and pre-packaged integrations. So there's a lot of pre-packaged integrations available. There's also, there are some pre-packaged integrations available for any premise for extended, because again, in this situation, we would just look at the integration packages for on-premise. Whatever's supported there would work for extended. But there's not nearly as many as there are for essentials. There still are some though. So we want to use those when possible, when they are available, just to activate essentially integrations that SAP has already built, right? So best practices integrations mean SAP has already built the integration. You are just activating the pre-built integration, okay? The next step would be looking at a website called the API Business Hub. And we'll take a look at this in more detail when we talk about integration later today or tomorrow, looking at this website to find pre-built integration packages by SAP and partners and using one of those because again, they're already built. It's just going to make your life easier to just activate an integration that's already been designed. And then last, if you cannot find a pre-built package, then just taking the pre-built APIs or essentially individual messengers that send data points or make data consumable from one system, allow another system to consume that data, and package those up together into your own integration. And this is all specific to building integrations with Cloud Platform integration, okay? So you will not find APIs that are RFC connections to send IDOCs for process orchestration in the API Business Hub. You're only going to find SOAP and OData APIs, which are specific to public open integrations to allow you to connect your system with any third party or any other SAP system. There's a lot of pre-built content. Use that pre-built content, use Cloud Platform, the integration suite as much as possible to host your integrations in a cloud environment. And then anytime that there's a deviation from the golden rules in Solution Manager, always from the golden rules in general, document those deviations and differences very clearly in a detailed way to explain why you couldn't go with sort of the cloud version of the solution. So why you couldn't use the cloud-based extensibility app, why you used process orchestration on-premise instead of using the process orchestration functionality hosted in Cloud Platform, right? So trying to clearly delineate why those decisions were made so that in the future, as customers are reviewing their landscape and their business processes, they're able to review some of those decisions and say, you know, we want to change that around. Maybe that was the case then, but we want to keep moving more towards the cloud mindset. And so now we'd like to turn these process orchestration integrations on-premise into having them hosted in cloud platform. Okay, let's talk about an overview of the implementation methodology. There's a lot of information on this. Generally, we'll just go from start to finish. Early in the discovery phase, this is the sales phase, this is when customers might be using the model company, the 30-day trial system, to get an experience of an actual system for technically on-premise, but really S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition. It works for that too. Then they're going to be working with a salesperson to do the digital discovery assessment. In that discovery assessment, we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in just a second here, but this discovery assessment is specifically just for cloud. So not for on-premise or any premise, it's just for cloud. And it will, based on the questions that are answered, direct you towards an automated decision of Cloud Extended or Cloud Essentials. That's called the qualification or the brand guardian process, to essentially make sure that customers are getting exactly the solution that they need. As soon as a customer starts to need industry-specific technology or functionality, or they need maybe a complex integrated landscape, or they need a lot of localizations, then you're pretty much automatically ruling out essentials and going into the cloud extended area. So that qualification process is to make sure that the right solution is chosen early on. In the digital discovery assessment, there's also a process where individual scope items are reviewed. It's actually a relatively time-consuming process because you'll be reviewing scope items one by one with your sales contact, with your SAP account contact. And reviewing those scope items means that you're ultimately flagging or selecting the best practices that you could then choose to activate, or activate those and a model company, or just activate a model company in your sandbox system when you get into the implementation of the solution. So purchase is made, setup and enablement, beginning and preparation for the fit to standard analysis is done. You would either have a sandbox system or what we call the exploration system, and you can deploy a model company in the sandbox system, or you can build it up from scratch. And again, it's kind of unclear in the methodology at this point in time as to why you would pick the exploration of the sandbox system, but ultimately you will pick one or the other, and it's based on the customer's preference. So I think for the most part, most people are going to go the route of getting a sandbox and just activating likely an industry scope. And what's included in the standard implementation of Extended Edition is the multinational or national industry scope for enterprise organizations, so the full enterprise scope. From there, we do fit to standard analysis. We collect all of the configuration details and data from the customer, data that needs to be migrated, values that need to be configured to set up their business processes, because of course that model company that we use for fit to standard or whatever's in the sandbox system is going to have pre-populated or preloaded data so that consultants can deliver these fit to standard workshops, which say for each line of business, let's talk through each of these business processes that are predefined, and let's make sure that they meet your needs and they work for you specifically. You might find that too many scope items were identified in the discovery assessment, and they actually don't need some of the business processes. You might find that not enough scope items were identified, and they need a business process that was not originally flagged in the discovery assessment. So the purpose of those fit to standard analysis, besides gathering configuration values in each line of business area, working with those experts from the customer side, so working with business experts in each line of business area, so finance, sales, procurement, right? All of those are individual workshops that would need to happen. So besides collecting that, you're also validating the implementation scope so that you don't begin implementing something that doesn't quite fit their requirements. Then we get into the end of the explore phase, and after all of the Fit to Standard workshops have been completed, you've identified things like the organizational structure, the chart of accounts, that really core data, core financial data, and you finished all the workshops for the other lines of business. You can then provision the exploration or development system that will then be connected through a transport path to quality and to production. There's a couple of specific use cases where, with the model company that we mentioned yesterday, with the custom assembled model company, if you happened to use that during, have that deployed in a sandbox system for the Fit to Standard workshops, because the customer knows exactly what the scope is that they want to implement in that custom assembly system, you can then have it copied, have the configuration copied over to your development system, and then transport from dev to quality, quality to production. So in certain cases, you can do system copies. That's really what that custom assembly is, the only situation where you can do that. Otherwise, you would just deploy a new model company configuration in the development system and then go from there in terms of migrating data and everything else, setting up integrations, all of those things. Build extensions, lots of business process testing, unit testing as you're configuring, end user testing. The Agile methodology approach focuses on not a big bang release, so not saying let's configure everything and then launch the entire solution and hit everybody with all these new features, but it focuses on a multi-phased approach. What is something that you can account for in the discovery assessment is actually when scope items will be released in phase 1, 2, or 3. So actually, there's a drop-down menu where you can select this scope item. We're going to roll this out in phase 1, 2, or 3. So multi-phased approach of rolling out the solution and having essentially small wins. So configuring a chunk of functionality, having end user acceptance testing, and then releasing it, making it available. So it is sort of an incremental rollout over time. Okay. I just want you to know that there's a really great Jam group that you can join. I will type the link in chat. And for questions, please send those to everyone. You don't need to send those to me privately. Okay. So here is the link in chat, and you can go ahead and send a request. I think that's a SurveyMonkey link, and you can just put in your information and request to join this group. And then once you get accepted to join the group, they'll send you an email with the link to join this Activate methodology group. So this is actually the team that controls and updates and maintains the Activate methodology that you see in Roadmap Viewer. So that's the same team that runs this particular Jam group, and this allows you to basically interact with them and ask them specific questions. Okay, so we use Solution Manager for the implementation of Extended Edition. This covers the complete application lifecycle of your IT solution running in an on-premise, hybrid, or cloud deployment option. It is not targeted towards Essentials Edition, just for Extended Edition and any premise. We use Solution Manager to manage the implementation tasks like tracking the status of decisions for project management, open requirements, progress during Fit to Standard workshops in the Explore phase. We can also then use it after we've implemented to track and monitor all of the integrations, our business processes, figure out where we can enhance business processes. There's also these two additional add-on solutions called Focused Build and Focused Insights that have no additional cost. So you can get those by just setting up the add-on, no additional cost to those. You do have to just activate and configure them. And Focused Build is an out-of-the-box tool-supported methodology to manage the requirements and the software development for large Agile implementation projects. So that's specifically in the project management arena. Of course, Solution Manager already has its own project management component, so you can essentially use one or the other. Focused Insights lets you build, and it's really targeted more towards the IT organization after deployment of the solution, because it lets them reuse all of these existing KPIs that SAP has released and built, and then also lets them build customer-specific dashboards that enable tracking and analytics of a lot of different functionality in the solution. And Focused Run is different. It's a separate solution. Focused Run is for service organizations that are monitoring and essentially providing support for a lot of different customers, and it allows them to monitor all of those different customers, specifically through the dashboards and functionality it provides. There are some pretty cool demo landscapes that I would like you to know about for Solution Manager. So if you have not ever tried Solution Manager or experienced it, there are some demo landscapes. There's an internet demo system that is pre-configured in its public shared system. It's updated or refreshed almost every couple of weeks or so. There's a private cloud system which is deployed through Cloud Appliance Library. However, of course, you need to have a license for an infrastructure as a service like AWS, Google Cloud Platform, Azure. So I prefer the internet demo system because it's preloaded with a bunch of data. It's pretty cool. And then there's the Media Center, which has predefined essentially tutorials in how to do all of these different activities. So you could use the Media Center first to learn how to do things. And then you could use the internet demo system to try things out. You scroll down, you can see that there are all of these. This is how you access it, Solution Manager Launchpad, and there are all of these predefined users that you can choose to log in as. Okay, a couple of questions in chat. Okay, there's a concept called custom-driven integration. What should be the approach if there are no out-of-the-box integrations or whitelisted APIs? We'll talk about that later on today, but that'll kind of bring us off on a sidetracked route at this point in time. So in the interest of time, we'll talk about that when we focus just on the integration section. But essentially, you just reuse the content that's pre-delivered in the API Business Hub. We'll talk more about that later. In the Discover phase, you can, of course, access that free 30-day trial for the Cloud Appliance Library. You're just going to choose the latest on-premise trial system to deploy it. However, the software trial itself is free for 30 days, but you have to have an infrastructure as a service license to one of those three different providers, AWS, GCP, or Azure. The Digital Discovery Assessment first does a quick qualification, something called a quick qualification to determine the best solution approach for a customer. So you use this discovery assessment, and this Brand Guardian process first gives you an automated result. And if you have more of a complex assessment that you're filling out, the computer will take a look at that and go, I think we need a person to double check this. So you're going to get results based on the automated guidance from the system, or you will get essentially a flag for requiring somebody to check up. So you can see in this situation, I've just kind of filled out the assessment a couple times trying to get it to show me different results. And so I use this application called Supply Chain of Selling, and you set up a new prospect essentially, and you complete this opportunity information. And then with a quick qualification, it may have determined that we needed Essentials Edition. However, as I filled out the qualification in more detail, in the detailed discovery, so all of the additional information you start describing, it said there are some potential gaps that are reported. So it's looking like you need more industry in this case. I was using industry functionality to try to get it to convert this into an extended edition assessment. So it's saying we need to do a brand guardian review. So it's actually flagged it for a person to review because this is the automated result. And then as I filled out the assessment in more detail, it said, okay, it looks like there's some gaps that we've identified here. And probably Essentials is not going to be enough for you. You're probably going to need extended. For the quick qualification, it could also flag extended. And then you continue to fill out the detailed discovery information. And there is a link for the digital discovery assessment tenant that you can register for. So there's the link in chat. So you can register for this assessment tenant. And once you do that, it'll bring you to what looks like a Fiori Launchpad, just the standard Launchpad look and feel. And the primary applications, and this is really only relevant if you are in the sales, pre-sales area. Applications are supply chain of selling and digital discovery assessment. You go in here, you'd create your opportunity first. And after you create an opportunity, then you're able to click this button to open the discovery tool. That'll jump you over to the digital discovery assessment right here. Let's go ahead and open this up for one of the existing. And this is what it looks like visually. So this discovery assessment is for both editions of Cloud, and it just directs through an automated or a person decision of which edition that you need. You're flagging specific scope items in each line of business. Okay, so the phase that you want to release this, the priority, any questions, any notes, these are the individual business processes, right? Those are scope items. And then once you get into the additional requirements, that's based on adding custom requirements, and the detailed qualification is specific to the line of business scope items that you flag. It's a pretty cool tool to play around with. Okay. In the prepare phase, so first off, you've done that discovery assessment to do the scoping. Then in the prepare phase, we're using that assessment to build the project charter and to determine what is going to be covered in the Fit to Standard workshops. So which scope items in each line of business will need to be discussed and demonstrated to the customer to collect configuration, value, feedback, and extensibility information, data migration, who needs to be permissioned to do what, all of that is collected during Fit to Standard workshops. In the prepare phase, there's a very important task that happens before the Fit to Standard workshops, although it's kind of considered part of that entire process. It's called the Business-Driven Configuration Questionnaire. In this questionnaire, you are taking a master spreadsheet, essentially, and filtering it down into specific items based on the line of business. So let's look at the roadmap viewer. In the content section, we will go to business-driven configuration assessment. And you'll see for each line of business, all of these accelerators here. These accelerators are specifically tied to the configurations that you'll be making. If we open this up, okay, so what you're going to see here is the different configurations, the IDs of the configuration items. We do not use SSCUIs when you're configuring the S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition. They're literally, the app doesn't exist for it. So in Essentials, you use what's called the Manager Solution app, and then there's an area called Configure Your Solution. That doesn't exist. That app is not supported for Extended. So when you are configuring these items, you are actually configuring them through the transaction codes. This is going to require a deeper level of knowledge. So once you get into this area, so essentially you're here right now to learn kind of fundamentals, foundational topics. What we find in any premise or extended edition type implementations is that you have a larger implementation team because there's a higher degree of a need for technical knowledge, specific specialized technical knowledge. For example, in this case, you learn fundamentals type content here. And then if you decided I would like to train to be an implementation consultant for the HR line of business for extended or for finance, then you're going to go complete the training course and the certification exam for the on-premise line of business content. You would not complete the training course for cloud because cloud is just referring to Essentials Edition, which is totally different and configured completely differently than any premise is, or extended edition in this case. At some point in the future, if you've heard about the tool called Central Business Configuration, Central Business Configuration is going to replace the way that we configure Essentials Edition right now. Probably in 2011 will be the time when we start hearing that it's being rolled out to customers on a more global scale. It's still in the pilot testing phases right now for a small group of early adopters. But Central Business Configuration, like the implementation portal for Calm, is slated in the roadmap to become available for extended edition in the future. However, that roadmap and that timeline is still pretty fuzzy. So at some point in time, we will see that you actually do use SSC UIs because the concept of a configuration item is the same regardless of where you're configuring it. It's still something you use to configure a functionality for a business process to work. So eventually we will actually use Central Business Configuration to configure extended edition. For now, you're still going to be using the transaction codes in the SAP GUI in order to configure the system. So that's why you really need to complete the line of business specific training course for on-premise to learn how to do all of that configuration. It requires more technical knowledge and more specific knowledge for an implementation consultant. You're also going to have dedicated integration, extensibility people that are very knowledgeable in working with the back-end tools like Eclipse or ABAP Workbench, even though we would prefer that you stay away from those tools as much as possible. If you're going to need to do those things or build custom business processes, you obviously need an expert who has a deeper level of knowledge and a coding knowledge in order to do those things. So developers. You're also going to need somebody who would be a Fiori expert. So somebody to actually configure and set up the user interface of the Launchpad itself. Because inherently, the Launchpad is not already configured. So like pretend, oops, we've already navigated away from it. Pretend that this is your Launchpad for your solution, right? So with these applications, because the Launchpad looks the same, it's just different applications would be permissioned to you. That is inherently not configured and not set up for extended edition, the way that it is for Essentials. Same for any premise. So you actually have to have a Fiori expert configure and activate all of the applications that you're going to use in the Launchpad so that then you can permission them to people. So you have a much bigger implementation team because there's areas where it's just not possible for an implementation consultant to know how to do all of these things because it requires quite a bit of technical knowledge in these different areas. So there'll be someone who just does this component. Okay. So you complete the on-premise training course for HR. You are an expert in this. So you're collecting these configuration values by delivering these essentially small workshops to talk about configuration items specific to each line of business. The level is referring to the order in which you configure these things. So level 3 is you configure them essentially last. Level 1 is you configure those things first. Okay. From there, you're preparing for the workshops. There's going to likely be a higher degree of a need for implementing some custom processes. So even if you deploy a model company in a sandbox system, you can still customize that system. You can still add additional customer-owned business processes, as we call them, or configurations that are special to the customer that they might want to see in action in this model company. So plan enough time to prepare the systems themselves. You also then will set up test users for the customers to go ahead and log into that sandbox system after the fact and test out the processes that they've seen delivered in their workshops. So you collect all of this data in the Fit to Standard workshops. It's really show and tell, collecting feedback on that, learning where things need to be customized, but trying to stick with the standard processes as much as possible, and ultimately building the backlog of what needs to be configured during the realize phase to close those gaps or differences between what the solution inherently does and what the customer needs it to do. Then you are planning and designing the integrations, the extensions, output management, referring to anything that is published as a PDF from the system that you could print or download or export. Plan for the releases, right? So when is the next upcoming release, semi-annual release? Make sure that you are following those golden rules, check in on that, and then do the implementation. So weekly or bi-weekly sprints as well. And just as you have with on-premise, you can have multiple transports running at the same time. The business-driven configuration assessment, again, is actually very important, and it is a newer step in the roadmap. You know, it used to just be you do blueprinting workshops, right? And you didn't do this step at all. It is a very important step that should not be skipped though, because you're collecting a lot of important information ahead of the workshops. The amount of information that you have to collect during the workshops, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on it. So this essentially tries to take off some of the pressure by collecting some of those at least configuration values ahead of time. The level here, level 2 questions should be answered in the prepare phase. I'm sorry, not configured first, but they should be answered in the prepare phase. Level 3 questions can be answered in the explore phase during Fit to Standard workshops. Okay, explore phase. Now we are getting into the workshops themselves. So detailed plans are going to be developed for all work streams of the implementation, and you're going to have more work streams than you'd have with Essentials Edition, just because inherently the implementation of extended or on-premise or any premise is more complex. You're going to conduct those workshops by demonstrating business processes to the customer line of business experts in either the sandbox or the exploration system. Again, it's a little unclear about which system and why you'd have either of those systems, but it just depends on what is apparently selected by the customer. The best practices or model company can be deployed in a tenant to populate the system with configuration. You can also have it populated with sample data to use for those demonstrations. You're confirming the to-be business processes, so saying, this is the best practice. We are confirming, does this work for you? Is there anything that we need to customize? And of course, the range of customization is massive when it comes to this, but you always want to start with, do we need to add an extension? So does there need to be a logic trigger at some point that triggers some approval by a particular person? Well, is it possible to do that with the Fiori extensibility apps? Because there's an app for custom fields and business logic. So we would look up the application where that approval or authorization needs to be triggered. We'd look that up in the help portal, and we would determine, does it allow extensibility? So let's just briefly, since we're on that topic right now, let's really briefly jump over there. So here's the help portal link for cloud. And we are going to go into product assistance. And it's going to have the different areas, the different industries, lines of business. Okay, the image map on the left is showing the areas, but there's no image map showing up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's try something like sourcing and procurement. This information is talking about essentially the end users using and the functionality of the applications. So we can go into operational procurement, this area. These are specific applications, right? So creating a purchase requisition, that's an application. I can open this up and I can see that app extensibility to create the requisition is available. And I can implement logic for these business add-ins. So business add-in for PR check, business add-in for item. So these are logic. These ones are UI elements or custom fields. Okay. Then typically with essentials, you would it would end here. And now, of course, because extended, we can do more. If we find out that that logic trigger is not enough to satisfy their needs, then we say, okay, well, can we do this with Cloud Platform? Can we do the extension there? And if not, then you'd be looking at this area for developers doing this hard coding, using the ABAP coding tools in the SAP GUI in the customizing transactions in that NetWeaver layer. Okay, Fit to Standard workshops, we are capturing required configuration, collecting the Delta requirements for extensions, integrations, reports, outputs. Business-driven configuration questionnaires are used to support and speed up the configuration decisions. You are managing all of this information in Solution Manager to create kind of a single source of truth where everything will live, tracking the status of decisions, open requirements, progress, and then handing over the Delta requirements to the specialists. So at this point, we find that it's incredibly important to be very specific and detailed with those Delta requirements or differences between what the system does, what the customer needs it to do, because you are doing a lot of handing over to other people to configure these more complex type technical resolutions, if you will. For the workshops, it's the same general process as you would have. Review the best practice process flow, which is in Best Practices Explorer. It's just that visual process flow. Demonstrate the business process from start to finish. You also have test scripts. So using those same test scripts, implementation partners are doing this, discussing how the process flow works or fits with their requirements. Again, trying to keep with that cloud mindset and sort of hopefully kind of directing and leading customers towards that particular path, because there's really big benefits to sticking with that when it comes to upgrading and maintaining your system over time. Identifying the delta or differences, identifying required configuration, letting the customer know that you've created some test users so that they can actually execute the scenarios that they've seen in their line of business specific workshops after the workshops themselves. Now, in this day and age, we are finding that because the Fit to Standard workshops should be, or in the past have always been on site, we are finding that these days that's just not possible. A lot of places still aren't open, and really it's just not the best idea for the health of everybody, because some people might need to fly in if we had these on site. So SAP has been releasing information about how to conduct remote Fit to Standard workshops. There's some really handy accelerators in the roadmap specific to that. If we look at the Explore phase and Fit to Standard analysis here. So under accelerators, here's the specific how to approach with Cloud Extended. And then here is the how to approach remote Fit to Standard workshops. So I'll send you this link as well. So just for your information, there are a few different helpful tools. In an ideal situation, again, they would be delivered on site just to have everybody together and collaborating in one room. It's going to help you get some really good information from them. However, if you can't do that, Microsoft Teams can be used for video conferencing. It's also an area where you can have in the same screen, essentially, document storage. You can have discussions and chats about specific topics. So maybe create a Teams group for each line of business area or workshop. The backlog is used to capture all those Delta requirements, but we need to use Solution Manager to maintain the central version of that document, so we don't have multiple versions floating around. Then you have Mural, which is a collaboration tool that provides a virtual whiteboard where you can collaborate in real time using the different whiteboard templates for your working sessions. And then just in terms of preparation for delivering the workshops and then running the workshops themselves, you'll find a lot of good information in that running the remote Fit to Standard Workshops Accelerator deck. There's a lot of detailed slides that talk exactly about how to keep people engaged and when to check in and how often to take breaks and all of the technical checks that you want to do prior to running the workshops for both the partners and the participants of the workshops. So I'd recommend definitely taking a look at that document, and they have some fun little sample agendas here that are pretty creative, like for this break, move work clothes from washer to dryer. Make sure kids have not destroyed kitchen or each other. So there's some good information in that accelerator. In the realize phase, you are configuring the development system, or the term that's kind of also used interchangeably is the explore system. So you're configuring the exploration system or the development system to test those pre-delivered functionalities, custom configurations, custom development. If you choose to set up a system based on a model company, you can have a direct setup approach, which is deploying the model company best practices directly in the exploration or dev system. Or you can do a selective scope item approach where you don't have to use all of the model company best practices, because of course you might not need all of them, and you're just going to selectively move specific best practices or configurations, business process configurations from the sandbox system that you may have used to deliver the Fit to Standard workshops. Next, you're going to prepare your quality assurance system or quality system and make sure it's configured and available to use for comprehensive testing in a production-like environment. If a customer selected the model company with the direct setup approach, you can deploy the configuration directly from the dev system into the quality system. When first you build the extensions and the integrations in the dev or exploration system and then transport to quality. After testing and validation and quality, you then are going to deploy everything into production. You're always going to use, for a new implementation or selective data transition, the S/4HANA Migration Cockpit tool. And then you're also going to use the Solution Manager test suite in the quality system to do all of that comprehensive testing. And the test suite allows you to not only do automated tests, but also assign different tests to people and manage actual people doing those manual tests as well. Okay, a couple questions in chat. Is there a link or tool to calculate the TCO to implement S/4HANA? Not that I know of. Not that I know of. It's really, I mean, there's different, like the business scenario recommendations, the transformation navigator, innovation discovery. So there's all of these tools that you use to discover and identify what would be best for a customer. The business scenario recommendations is based on a customer's current ECC system usage. So that's typically highly accurate in terms of kind of predicting what they would need in their S/4HANA system. However, I'm not sure if anything gives you a number that's that specific. Okay, L1 questions, do these exist in the Discover questionnaire? I'm not sure. If they did, they'd probably be in the organizational structure, business-driven configuration questionnaire, something that's much more foundational. I think they do, because I don't know why they would just start at 2 without having a 1, but it's probably the very foundational topics. And then 2 is you have to do it in prepare phase. 3 is you could do it in prepare phase. I mean, ideally, you just collect as much information as you could there, but then you can also validate and collect it in the explore phase. Okay, does Solution Manager have the capability to track the backlogs? It has, it's a central document repository. So you would just have a central backlog that is consolidated from all of the different line of business workshops. The test suite for automated testing, it uses the Solution Manager. Well, within the test suite, you can use the Solution Manager dedicated testing tool. You can also actually use that in combination with other testing tools from partner providers. There's a few other testing tools that are, I think there's a landscape transformation type tool from SAP. There's also a tool from HP, Hewlett Packard, an HP testing type tool. There's a lot more information and details in the training course content, as well as in the help portal that focuses on testing. The capabilities of Solution Manager for testing are just kind of really massive. So there's a lot of different things. I mean, even with building the tests themselves, you can build them in 2 different types of infrastructures, if you will. One is really highly code-based and really needs a developer. One is a lot more business user-friendly for building the tests, but ultimately every business process test is based off of your scope items that are in Solution Manager, or excuse me, in the product documentation of Solution Manager. It's not the same tool as used in Essentials, though. Is it possible to use Activate Extended Edition for a new implementation for on-premise S4 hosted in HANA Enterprise Cloud? No, you would, because technically the on-premise implementation, even if it is hosted in an infrastructure as a service, it's still the on-premise solution. So you'd still want to use the on-premise roadmap. Does the test tool have integration with cloud and on-premise applications? It can test integrated scenarios. So you can develop a test that runs across other integrated solutions. Test suite in Solution Manager can use, CBTA's component-based test automation. There's another type of test automation. I can't remember what it's called, but CBTA is the more business user-friendly one. The other one is older and more for developers. Yes, ECAP. Yep, exactly. Okay. Oh. And then with our sprints for configuration, you just want to keep the agile mindset, which effectively boils down to small wins and not a big bang. So regularly configuring, testing configuration, doing the end user testing, and then releasing that configuration and doing a multi-phased implementation approach. Okay, in the deploy and run phases, deploy phase, purpose of this is to cut over to production system. You're confirming the organizational readiness of the system and the business operations, and then you're switching over to the new system. Any of those open issues are resolved. Customers are doing things like using the IT service desk component of Solution Manager to set up their own internal IT desk to manage incidents and sort of be the first stop of submitting tickets to their own service desk. And then the service desk determines if they can resolve it. And in the worst case scenario, if they can't resolve it, then it can be submitted to SAP to deal with. So setting up all of those business process management, application operations components, and working with those to manage and monitor the system itself. And then the run phase customers, of course, are maintaining and operating the system post go live, running the solution productively. One tool that SAP recommends is implementing what's called the SAP User Experience Management by Knoa, or NOAA. I guess I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, to analyze and improve the employee adoption. So this is an end user adoption tool that collects a lot of different analytics to see which applications people are using and how much time they're spending doing certain tasks, to kind of determine if someone is spending way too much time using a particular application. Maybe they're unclear on how to use it. Maybe that's an area where you need to create some customized training that's embedded in the system. We'll talk about the training strategy after the break, and the embedded training tools that you can use to essentially help people learn how to use the system. And the more you facilitate people using the system and learning how to use the system, the better the overall user adoption will be. So this tool is really just tracking usage of the applications and time spent doing different activities in the applications. Okay, that is everything for the Activate methodology and kind of highlighting those key specific implementation tasks. Last question before the break. What can you tell us about the use of Penaya tools together? I've never heard of that before. So I'm not sure if that's for testing, but I will grab the link in the help portal that talks about the partner testing tools that are supported. So there's certain combinations of testing tools you can use with Solution Manager. And that is not one that I have seen. All right, let's go ahead and pause here. We'll take a 10-minute break. Please come back at 15 minutes after the hour. All right, I will talk to y'all in 10 minutes. Come back at 15 minutes after the hour. All right, come on back from break. Hope you enjoyed our fun fact. Apparently, there is research to support the fact that we have not only circadian rhythms at night, which typically a sleep cycle lasts, a REM cycle lasts around an hour and a half, so about 90 minutes. And actually, just a little sidebar here, we all generally, I think, know that a 20-minute nap is a power nap. And this is all based on that REM cycle and the sleep stages, the cycles that you're moving through during that entire 90-minute cycle. So 20 minutes is a power nap. 45 minutes is called a mental refresh because the 45-minute nap is kind of a mental reset where your brain has had enough time to consolidate information and essentially organize itself. So it organizes the information that you've learned, files it into the right cabinets, puts it away where it needs to go, and then you will wake up feeling mentally more clear and reset. And then 90 minutes is a full sleep cycle. And there's also some research that supports the concept that if you have not had enough sleep one night, so generally the knowledge is that you are adding to your sleep deficit every night that you don't get at least 7 or 8 hours of sleep or so. But you can actually potentially, as long as you take a nap the following day, if you take a nap for like an hour and a half or maybe even 3 hours, you could potentially make up a couple of those sleep cycles as long as it is the following day. Some research supports that, just kind of interesting. We also appear to have these ultradian rhythms that follow that same 90-minute cycle during the day. And that's just if you start to notice that I notice that I'm misspelling things when I'm typing. And around that time, it's like, oh, maybe it's been about 90 minutes and I need to take a little break here to reset my brain. Okay. And I just did a little Googling since I'm by no means a solution manager expert. There are dedicated training courses just to talk about solution manager because it's the range of functionality is just so massive. So I really only talk about it and have learned about it in relation to what we use it for, what components we use in relation to the extended edition implementation. So I just did a little Googling and found a nice little SAP blog that I sent in chat about using Penaya. I think that's how it's pronounced, Penaya versus Solution Manager for upgrade impact analysis. That's something that you can take a look at. And then also I previously sent another link talking about the test suite in the help portal. At the bottom of the page, you can see the test tool combinations of SAP tools plus partner tools. From a training strategy, obviously this is a lot more detailed than what's covered in what I'll show you today. So assuming that you've actually had a group kind of related to the organizational change management team that has defined the training strategy, part of that is doing change impact analyses for every single Fit to Standard workshop. So in a perfect world, you'd actually have someone from the OCM or change management team participating in each Fit to Standard workshop. And every time you finish discussing one scope item or business process, they go, okay, let me just check in. Is this a major change to what you're doing now? Is this pretty much the same? Is it just basically there's going to be new applications? So people just need to get familiar with the new look and feel. So trying to assess the change even on the scope item or business process, individual business process level, which can then be used to obviously assess the overall amount of change for an entire line of business. So many change impact analyses throughout, in addition to the overall big picture, assessing the change impact there. To facilitate the adoption of a solution, you're always trying to figure out how can I make this as easy to learn and pick up to people as possible. Because even though S/4HANA Cloud Extended does allow us to do things like rebuild custom business processes, if someone is really following that cloud mindset, they're going to be mostly trying to stick with the standard processes. So those standard industry specific processes, standard business best practice processes for the lines of business. And if they stick with those as much as possible, and do minimal customizations to those, whether using the in-app Fiori applications or the backend tools, they can reuse a lot of the training content that SAP has already provided and delivered. And this training content is in a place we call the Learning Center. It's all built using a tool called SAP Enable Now, previously known as, I think, WPB Workforce Performance Builder. So that was an SAP tool. Now it's been rebranded as SAP Enable Now. As a customer, you can also download the pre-delivered tutorials from SAP, which of course pre-delivered based on the standard business process. So if you've customized the standard process, it's not really going to work for you because you would need to modify it to fit your specific process. So you can download those pre-delivered content packages and modify them to fit with your actual implemented process, and then make it available in the same place all the other ones are in the Learning Center. You do need a license to Enable Now in order to do that. Also, obviously, in order to build your own business processes. So with the implementation of any premise or extended edition, you're always going to have a heavier need for building training content. The actual initial deliverable in the roadmap viewer for building training and assessing training needs is in the prepare phase. So it's essentially saying really early on, we need to consider how much we're going to need to build here in order to make sure that end users can figure out how to use the system. In the best case scenario, you would have, think of babies using iPads. You would have applications that are so intuitive that a baby can use it, right? Because it just makes sense. That's not necessarily possible with some of the business transactions that you have to do in different applications. Obviously, this is going to be a bit more complex, but the idea with the Fiori user interface and user experience is to make it as easily adoptable as possible. So instead of the SAP GUI transaction screens, which are kind of more based on Excel, where if you think of Excel, all of the buttons, the save button, all of those are in the upper right-hand corner. The web-based user interface concept is that buttons to save or close are in the lower right-hand corner. And like a create a new item would be somewhere in the upper right corner, okay? So rather than everything being right up here in the upper left corner, web-based user interfaces are more around here. And just think of any website you go to. If you sign up for a website to create a user account, where are those buttons? Where are the fields? That's the idea behind the Fiori applications. So this embedded learning and training, based on each application that you're in, you can access the Learning Center. If there may not be a tutorial that fits with that particular business process, especially if you've customized it, so you'll need to build your own, but you can then have it loaded in the Learning Center so that it's available here, and people can find tutorials based on filtering with their business role. Also in this area, you can have this little kind of special hotspots. So it will basically hover over and allow you to hover over these areas and say, explain to me what these particular items mean. So that's another part of the embedded training and learning content. So you use this Enable Now tool to provide guidance, performance support while people are using the software itself so that they don't have to go somewhere else. And even in this Learning Center area, when I open up the question mark in the upper right corner, that's how we access it. It will even say, find more in product assistance. So rather than I have to go and open up a new browser page and go directly to the help portal, it's actually just going to provide me the link to jump there directly. The other thing I wanted to point out is just the 3 different areas that you can access the tutorials. You can access them in the S/4HANA Cloud System, of course, in the Learning Center, in Best Practices Explorer. However, you're actually going to be looking at Best Practices Explorer for S/4HANA Cloud Essentials Edition. For whatever reason, they're not posted in the on-premise, even though there are a lot of business processes that are the same between Essentials Cloud and on-premise or any premise and Cloud Extended. So just the place where you'll find them is in Best Practices Explorer. There's this link to the Best Practices content library. And then in the Activate Roadmap Viewer, we can also just keyword search for tutorial, and we will be able to find it in the accelerators area in our extended edition roadmap. I'm going to go to accelerators, and I'm just going to do a Control F. Are you not? Whoop, help if I spelled it right. Okay, it was definitely here originally when I created that slide a few weeks ago. So what we're going to do instead is go back home. And we're going to go into Activate Methodology for Cloud, which is Essentials. We'll go to Accelerators. And there we go. So this is the link to the tutorials. And in this particular case, some of the tutorials are not going to be relevant because they are specific to things like under getting started, working with, like this is relevant, using the Learning Center, getting help, all of that. These are all relevant here, actually. Working with the Launchpad, let's look at those. All of that's relevant. User management, not relevant, because with Cloud Essentials, we have applications for user management that don't exist in Cloud Extended. That's not relevant. Most of these are not relevant, except flexible workflow, view browser, service interfaces would work. These other ones, there's dedicated applications to do things like setting up integrations and doing configuration of the SSCUIs that, again, don't exist in Extended, but they exist in Cloud Essentials. And then the task tutorials, you would just look for the scope items. So everything, scope items are all listed out. So just, again, Control F, keyword search for whatever the scope item ID is. And if there's a tutorial, there are obviously are not tutorials for everything, but if there's a tutorial to support it, it will be available here and you'll find it here. The link does change every quarter. So you see that this is specific to the 2005 library. So you'll need to go back to Roadmap Viewer and re-bookmark this tutorials link. It used to be in the Accelerators for Extended Edition literally a couple weeks ago. So I'm not sure why it's disappeared, but you can always find it in the Essentials Edition roadmap. Okie dokie. Other resources. There is embedded documentation in the SAP GUI screens. So whenever you're looking at the SAP GUI screens, you can pretty much always find the documentation by pressing the F1 key at any time to open up the help. And right now we're talking about the SAP GUI system logins. And there are two different screens. Most users would have access just to the Fiori front end. And then the developers and people building up the org structure and customizing transactions and all of that would have access to the NetWeaver backend screen. But regardless of the screen that you're in, you can always access the help by pressing F1, or you'll see help in the header bar of the windows along the top of the screen. The help can bring you to product assistance, which is the help portal, or the help portal, just the main help portal landing page. Release notes, which are typically in the product PAM. PAM stands for product assistance something. I totally forgot. PAM is just an area where on-premise, any premise extended edition, that release documentation is there. Generally, we go to different places for Essentials. You can also find links to it in the help portal, which will link you to PAM or link you to the relevant KBA or support note that's in the support launchpad. Okay. And then of course you've got learning hubs, learning hub, and learning rooms. So within Learning Hub, I just want to point out that there's only, thank you, product availability matrix. Yep, that's Pam. So within the learning journeys or Learning Hub, there's only one specific extended edition learning journey. It is actually under the cloud header. We could go to cloud, we could also just type it in keyword search. We'll load everything here, and it is right here. So extended edition onboarding fundamentals. You probably have already found your way to this one, maybe not. So this is the learning journey. We will eventually have a certification exam for this. It's just we haven't gotten to writing it yet since we just released the training course. So right now, you've got this become competent, do the planning strategies first, which is technically a classroom course, but it has all of the training course content itself is also in Learning Hub for self-led training. We also have live sessions on it. I just did one on Monday talking about that. And then you've got the extended edition onboarding fundamentals training. So this, if you press these links, and if you're already logged into Learning Hub in your browser, this will bring you directly to the training content for the e-learning. Okay, and then eventually at the end of this, there'll be a certification exam. Say that as a consultant, you then want to implement in the line of business area for asset management. Now you're going to go over here to S/4HANA. Because again, functionally, each line of business is the same between any premise and extended edition. So you're going to do the S/4HANA on-premise learning journeys to go into any more detail for extended edition. Okay, just keep that in mind. All right. That's about all for training. Just want to highlight the key resources there. Let's talk about configuration. So some terms for configuration right off the bat would be, number one, best practices content. So any standard business process delivered by SAP. Release upgrades include enhancements to these standard processes. With our S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition system, you activate best practices or model company, which is also a version of best practices in your development system first using the SAP Solution Builder. Okay. Now, once you activate the processes in Solution Builder, they then become available in the solution documentation area of Solution Manager, because that's your one-stop shop for all documentation related to any business process that you have in the system, whether it is best practice or customized or custom built. You never want to edit the best practice content directly. You always want to make a copy. So make a copy of the standard process, then edit the copy of the standard process. Just make it easier to upgrade your system and apply the enhancements to the best practice processes. As soon as you have modified a best practice process directly, you can no longer push out the enhancements. So even if enhancements are released and you do the technical upgrade of your system for one of the semi-annual upgrades, those enhancements cannot be published to a business process that has been customized using Solution Manager. This is why you need to make a copy and edit the copy. Then if an enhancement is pushed out, your standard best practice process will get updated. You would then make another copy of that. And if you've done anything fancy with your old process, you'd have to rebuild those customizations in the new version of the process, in the new copy. Okay, so we always recommend installing those latest enhancements when they're released, because that's always going to mean a customer gets the highest return on their investment in the system. The scope item is a business process. We have used different terms to refer to these over the years. scope item is one, business process or best practice process is another. We're now trending towards using business capabilities. So you'll probably start to see more information released talking about business capabilities in the future. Same exact thing as a scope item or business process, a process flow using different applications to execute some sort of a business task in the system. Content activation means the process of writing content of the customer solution into the database tables. Activating content, activating software. The active content is the content that the customer that has been activated, that are best practices that now exist in the customer solution. Customer adaptation content means that a best practice process has been copied and then edited, right? So now it differs from the standard best practice content. And a building block is something that is a term unique to any premise and extended. We never hear about building blocks in Essentials because this is a way too detailed, database level component that you can only edit in extended or any premise. So building block is a self-contained reusable entity of business content. It's the smallest logical unit of the best practice content architecture. That's where it includes customizing or master data information for that corresponding piece of business content. So again, only relevant for any premise and cloud extended edition, because if it contains customizing information, that means we use the SAP implementation guide, or what we call the IMG, and we use customizing transactions in the backend to work with those. Okay. And this is how we get to configure extended edition. So those SSCUIs, those configuration items, or excuse me, this actually is not so much configuration, but this is content activation. So this is what a screen would look like if you are activating best practices, whether it's just any best practices for a line of business or a model company, using Solution Builder. So the primary tool for doing this business process configuration is specifically for activating best practices is the Solution Builder. Solution Builder is not necessarily the same as Solution Manager, although it sounds like it would be. It's a separate little entity that you then integrate to Solution Manager. So the focus of this is just activating pre-built scenarios. Okay, so the recommended method of populating an extended edition system is to activate some kind of best practices to have a baseline. Most likely for a lot of customers, a model company or combination custom assembly of different industries within that model company. So implementing with the pre-configured content to set up a client with those best practices. After the business process content is available in the solution documentation of Solution Manager, after you activate this content. Solution documentation is the central location of all business process content for the entire solution. In fact, you actually build a business process test, whether it's a manual test case or an automated test case, off of the solution documentation. Because where else, right? That's the best place to go. That's where the business process and the process flow is completely documented. So you generate those cases actually off of the solution documentation. Before you create the best practices client, but after you install S/4HANA, there are some specific activities where if you're familiar with Essentials, you're in what's called the preset phase, where you need to activate specific enterprise business functions that can only be activated in this pre-content activation phase. So best practices have not yet been activated, and you're doing some pre-system setup, usually related to the org structure and the chart of accounts. Then you activate the content, the best practices, then you could ultimately go into Solution Manager, make copies, modify those processes, and then build your own custom processes. Okay, any customizing transactions are carried out in the implementation guide, which is accessed through Transaction SPRO, S-P-R-O, in the SAP GUI screens. Okay. And also, I just want to point this out again. With S/4HANA Cloud Extended Edition, it's again, a different process to go about accessing these systems. So inherently, you only get access to the 2 SAP GUI screens. And bear with me just one moment. I'm going to try to find a slide that I had on this that makes it a little clearer. Okay, I'm just going to try one other thing, and if I can't find it, then we'll keep going. But I think visually it will help you understand this more clearly. So I added it in one of my earlier decks that I uploaded to the Learning Room already earlier this week. Okay, well, apparently none of those. So I'll have to find it later on. But this, oh, actually, I know where it is. Okay, there we go. This is what I wanted to show you. I think this will help you understand it in a lot more clarity. So first of all, when you're configuring the system, you have to specifically deploy a tenant and have somebody who is a Fiori expert configure the Launchpad and all of the applications. So why would you do this? Because it seems like a bunch of extra work. Well, without the Fiori Launchpad, you just have these 2 screens. That's your enterprise system. That's kind of a bummer, right? This is the backend, the NetWeaver backend server. This is the Fiori front end server. So everybody has to use the front end or the backend server, type in transaction codes to do their business activities. Obviously, Fiori provides a significantly improved user interface and a significantly improved user experience. In fact, even if you give people permission to access this front-end server, so more business users that are doing their day-to-day tasks, we would still recommend giving them access to the Fiori Launchpad and just saying, you can do 95% of your job just with the applications in the Launchpad. There just are inherently some applications that don't exist, like to assign business roles to business users. You have to do that in this particular system. So you can't, those apps just don't exist in the Launchpad for any premise or extended edition. So in that case, you have to use this other one. But for pretty much everything else, you can say, everybody use this really pretty system. Like that's a huge part of the point of S/4HANA Cloud is having this really beautiful, simple, easy to use user interface. So there are 2 different ways that you can deploy this. What we recommend is the embedded deployment approach, which means that you have the Fiori front end server deployed into the ABAP stack in the backend system. So that's generally the recommendation here. So you've got your S/4HANA core software, which of course you cannot modify in extended edition. Then you have the SAP gateway. Then you have the Fiori user interface, and then all of the Launchpad content, which is right here. This is the Fiori Launchpad content. Okay, that's much nicer than this, right? Then there's also an alternative option here where you can deploy it as a hub. So you'll have a dedicated ABAP front-end server with the Fiori front-end server deployed in a standalone system in front of the back-end system, either behind or in front of a firewall. So your existing applications continue to run against the SAP Business Suite backend systems, while the newly installed applications of Fiori would need to be configured to run against the S/4HANA system, so to run against this system. So another prerequisite here, and why we just say install the other way because it's easier, is that you have to migrate the database of the existing Business Suite hub and upgrade the system to at least the minimum required versions. So there's a whole user interface technology guide for upgrading that system that is in the help portal. So if you take a look, I believe it is right here in this implementation area, we're going to find the technology guide right here, UI technology guide for installing the Fiori user interface. Okay. When it comes to transports, so whenever we do configurations, we have to have a way to copy them or move them from quality, from dev to quality and quality to production. So content is activated first in the development system. Customizing takes place, which is optional, but will likely happen with extended. And then you transport over to quality. Thorough testing happens there. And then you transport over to production system. One thing to keep in mind is that we do have transport applications. So even though you can use the transaction codes to do the transports, you essentially have to create packages for the transport, and then to execute the transport itself, there are actually dedicated applications that allow you to do that in the Fiori Launchpad. So instead, you can use those applications. They are not the same applications called Software Collection that we use in Essentials. I think it's Software Packages, and there's another application that allows you to execute the transport of the packages. But it's just something where you can do this directly in a Fiori application in that front-end user interface, which is, again, kind of a nicer way to work with the system. All right, that is actually all I have for configuration. Let's go ahead and take a look at integration, and we'll wrap up the rest of the day and get as far as we can with integration today. Okay, before we talk about that, question in chat: how do you get the optimal balance of using the Fiori UX and SAP GUI based on the machine consumption? I would say more so like consider just the user experience, like all of the employees, because adopting and using a really simple, easy to use user interface where all of the a lot of the applications are also mobile enabled applications, that's something that you can only do with Fiori. So the Fiori applications, that's first of all, I don't know the details of configuring and activating that, because there's going to be someone who's a dedicated Fiori expert that just does that, because there's a lot that goes into setting up and configuring all of the applications in the Launchpad in Essentials or any premise. So what we would recommend, though, is based on whatever business process you're using, look at the applications that are in that business process, because the test script will say, use this application or this transaction code. So just configure all of the applications for any business process that you're going to activate in the system itself. And then from there, you can assign people permissions so that they can use those applications. You can use Enable Now to provide the embedded training and learning tutorials to show them how to use those new applications instead of the transaction codes, and kind of as a backup, if it takes a period of time for people to get comfortable with the Fiori UI, they could use the transaction codes in the meantime. Okay, integration. Integration is a little bit of a generic concept, because with integration, you just have integration technologies, and the technologies are kind of the same, and you're just using whichever technology works for integrating in a particular scenario. So the integration technologies are generally the same across the board. We just use different types of integrations, depending if we're integrating on-prem to on-prem, on-prem to cloud, cloud to cloud, whatever the scenario might be. The integration concept is based on these 4 principles, and this is essentially the new concept that our executive team has been releasing, especially this past year, based on number 1, SAP wants to provide as many out-of-the-box integrations as possible to make it just really easy to set up and activate your system and get it ready to go. A tool that you can use for this is called the Cloud Integration Automation Service, which I have more information on a little later in this deck, that makes it easy to deploy some of those best practice integration scenarios that SAP has already built. You just need to activate them if you have the license to the product that you're then integrating. Also keeping the integrations open. So instead of process orchestration, which relies heavily on remote function calls or RFC connections, and then sending IDOCs typically between systems, instead of having that, which is considered an SAP private API, because it can only be used between SAP products that speak the IDOC language and can read the IDOC format, use public APIs that are generic and standard in terms of just open source development across the board. So use the open source like Cloud Foundry standards for developing these connectors with third parties or with other SAP products. That would be using OData, primarily OData and SOAP APIs. So open integration using public APIs where they're not specialized to just connect SAP solutions to each other. Holistic integration means having an integration suite that covers integration between application to application, business to business, business to government, as well as things like data management. So technologies for HANA data management and just all kinds of use cases, also getting into analytics integration. A resource here is called the Integration Solution Advisory Methodology. This methodology is just like if you think of the methodology in the roadmap viewer, it is a series of deliverables and tasks to execute for each phase of implementation. This methodology is also a series of recommended tasks and sort of mental processes to go through when the integration expert team is designing and defining their integration landscape specifically. AI-driven integration is trying to build in artificial intelligence wherever possible. An example of this is the SAP Cloud Platform Integration Advisor Service, which I also have more information on later in the deck, which has a cloud-based machine learning approach that enables users to define, to maintain, to share, and to deploy business-to-business and application-to-application integration content much faster than if they were building it from scratch. So the Integration Advisor Service. The elements of a cloud-based integration scenario include components, customer components that need to be integrated, and tenants. So in this cloud-based scenario, we have different customer components that are exchanging messages with each other. And in kind of the cloud-based integration methodology, so we're excluding process orchestration right now, process integration on-premise. We're just focusing on cloud platform. And cloud platform integration acts as an integration hub. Each customer component is securely connected to the cloud integration runtime. And the cloud platform integration tenant itself is fragmented into different tenants. So the tenants represent the resources of the platform that are allocated to a specific customer and are securely connected to another component within that customer's landscape. You can choose, depending on the integration, you can choose the transport protocol and the security level. And the security setup relies on digital keys, which are stored in what are called key stores. And the creation and management of these key stores is part of that security configuration of each component. which is going to be something handed off to an integration expert. It's going to be setting up and configuring these in Cloud Platform in that degree of detail. During the operation of an integration scenario, again, SCP is acting as that integration hub for the message exchange to ensure the process and the data flow. So in an integration scenario, there's typically an integration process flow and then value mapping that occurs. So the information is referred to as integration knowledge and contained in that integration content for each tenant. Then the key component there is the integration flow, specifying, just like a business process flow, step by step how a message is processed on a tenant. So this is the integration flow. This is the business process step, right? Or the integration process step. For example, a mapping system step would transform the data contained in the message so that it can be processed by a receiver system, whereas a routing step would determine that there are one or more receivers of a message. Okay, with the Cloud Platform Integration Suite, there are just a ton of capabilities. And in a nutshell, you can find all of them in this really cool website called the Discovery Center. For some reason, my link to that is not working. So here we go. So this is the Discovery Center. It even has, if you're curious and what you want to play around a little, you can log in with your SUser ID here, and you can access these missions, which kind of walks you through scenarios to set up some basic integrations. You can go to View Services, and you'll find the Extension Suite content, and then you'll find the Integration Suite content right here. So some of the big ones are API management, which is really just sending individual messages, sending specific data points from point A to point B. Like if I go to a fancy restaurant and I order food, a waiter has to facilitate taking my order from where I'm sitting and delivering it to the kitchen. So my message is my order for food, right? And someone facilitates delivering that to the kitchen for me. The waiter is the API then. They are the messenger. Connectivity refers to establishing connections between cloud and on-premise systems using a reverse invoke proxy method, which allows you to create a secure tunnel through the on-premise system firewall, which you would also need in the situation of extended edition, because there's a firewall that protects a private cloud environment. There's also other types of integration like data integration. There's the integration advisor that we just briefly talked about. The integration suite is just kind of the comprehensive set of all of the different types of capabilities. Internet of Things is a specific type of integration between devices and data. Open connectors are accessing third-party non-SAP applications with these 150 plus pre-built connectors. There's a page here that gives you a little screenshot. So there's this one, just to give you an idea, there's 150 and constantly more being built of these. So connectors to third-party non-SAP, typically cloud solutions. And then I also wanted to mention that there is, in the integration suite, process integration. So this is process integration or process orchestration hosted in the cloud. So integrate processes and data in A2A and B2B scenarios. Okay. This also comes with pre-built adapters and pre-built content. This is process orchestration or integration hosted in Cloud Platform. Okay. We are at the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and pause here. Tomorrow we will pick up with the rest of our integration content, and we'll talk about extensibility. Again, some big differences in between what we can do with Essentials versus Extended Edition, quite a bit more extensibility. We will cover the different data migration scenarios, because with Extended versus Essentials, we have some additional scenario. that we can use for migrating data using the migration cockpit. We'll talk more about business process testing in Solution Manager, and then supporting the solution if we have time. All right. Keep in mind that each session has a unique registration link. Here is the registration link for tomorrow, Thursday, day 3 of this session. And if you've not yet had a chance to fill this out, our managers ask us to send out the live session survey link every time we deliver a session. I review the comments that you can add in there about once a quarter. So feel free to add things like what you'd like to see different next time, or additional things you'd like to see next time in the comments. Okay, last call for questions. And also I'll put some fun facts up on the screen to send you on your way.